Welcome to Environmental Fridays. It is Personal Season 4. This season will be featuring 16 episodes with 16 guest speakers from Arizona, Barbados, Georgia, Grenada, Illinois, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Mexico, New Jersey, Ohio, Tobago, Trinidad, and the United Kingdom. Thank you to all our guest speakers. Now here's our host, Dr. Desmond Hartwell Murray. And this week's co-host, Dr. Sean Ned. And this week's guest speaker, Lanya Fanovich.
All right. So we want to welcome everyone to Environmental Fridays. It is Personal Season 4. And to learn more about Environmental Fridays, you can go to our website at www.theenvironmentalfridays.com. By the way, has everyone seen my screen? Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very good. And coming up next week, episode 6, we will be hearing from Matt, for short, but Matthew Mass. He's over at Southern Illinois University, and they have a really good program there. In fact, this was recommended to me, Matt, by the EPA. So you are being recognized for the work you're doing there. At least they are very much aware of what you're doing in your environmental resources training center. So he will talk to us about programs and opportunities next week, Friday. We have a special guest today. Our special guest has become a very good friend of mine. From the time she heard about Environmental Fridays and some of the other crazy ideas I had, she was very supportive, and she is probably one of the most hardworking secretary in the Tobago House of Assembly. I always see her online doing things, being in the community, getting things done. She is the secretary for the Division of Food Security, Natural Resources, and the Environment and Sustainable Development. She's the assembly person for Bagatelle Bacolette, where one of my aunts live. And she studied at the University of Edinburgh in ecological studies. So I asked her to just say a few words to us, since this presentation is under her portfolio.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Desmond.
Yes, no problem.
I'm seeing some of my colleagues here, Dr. Ned, Kerizan, I think I met you before. If not, you have the same name as someone in Tobago. Yes, right. So I am Natisha Charles Pantin, Secretary of the Division of Food Security, Natural Resources, the Environment and Sustainable Development. And I am from one of the largest villages in Tobago. I was born and raised in Mason Hall. I went to Mason Hall's primary school. And then from there, I went to the Signal Hill Senior Comprehensive School. And then on to the Eastern Caribbean Institute of Agriculture and Forestry, then to the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and finally at the University of Liverpool in England.
Oh.
So I would have been exposed to a lot of, a lot of education across agriculture, forestry, and ecology, and finally in the area of public health. So I'm able to more or less fit in comfortably into the same division that I worked in for 17 years. So, and I'm having fun sometimes, most times, because it's what I have to do, protect the environment. And of course, where I grew up on agriculture. My grandfather had over 45 acres of land. And that is how my parents, they were able to get their education and they passed that on to me. So I have been close to the earth for a pretty long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So it's a pleasure to meet all of you. And this division, while we are, I would say, about 8 nationally in terms of budgetary allocations, we try our best to manage what little we have. And I like to give people a snapshot of the challenges first, before I give you, all the nice, all the trimmings that seem as if the division has all that amount of money in what we are doing. But the majority of it is out of love and passion for the field. So after the budget every fiscal year, I get for development 24 million dollars just for development, right? And out of that, 23,600,000 I pay wages, right, for development workers, which would leave me with $400,000. And there's one that is not in US, that is in TT.
Oh, wow.
Right? So what you're seeing, we're carefully trying to manage what little we have, and we're trying to compete with other divisions that get the majority of the money, like the division of health, infrastructure, community development, tourism. So the bulk of the money go to those divisions so we're speaking relatively, I get no money at all. And what we do, what we do basically is put up proposals, and these proposals would fall in what we say priority projects. So I would have to argue, why would I need additional money to execute particular projects, and why protecting the environment and why agriculture should be a priority given, all the challenges such as inclement weather and all these things. And there's one people in Tobago would tell you, after the inclement weather last year, Tobago more or less had a massive landslips. We have a lot of infrastructural challenges across the entire island. So my competition for resources is pretty steep, yeah?
Okay.
But we have been managing. We're trying to empower workers. We're trying to empower the community, given the budgetary challenges that we're having under the division. I like to say I focus specifically on women and children. A lot of my efforts go into that, but I appreciate the men in my society because they have contributed a lot, especially, keeping us, supporting women throughout the community. So, but in my division, we have made provisions for women and for the youth, right, in agriculture. As a matter of fact, we have an agricultural incentive called the Youth in Agriculture Program, where we provide, it's actually the only form of grant that we give to young persons getting into agriculture, right? And that grant goes up to the age of 40, I believe, yes. So young people are able to access grants under the Youth in Agriculture Program, right? I'm very grateful for the staff. We have sat down and decided that we're going to continue to monetize different aspects of the assets under my division. And I hope I'm not speaking too much, but I've recognized over the years that we have had a lot of resources, and we're not putting the effort into managing it for to contribute towards the development of the sector. So, Dr. Ned, you would recall you attended the Little Great River Cocoa Experience. That activity rests on 150 acres of abandoned cocoa, which we revived in conjunction with the Ministry of Agriculture in Trinidad. And our efforts to protect Little Tobago, the Main Ridge Forest Reserve, you're going to see a lot of projects being rolled out, towards protecting the environment, including the implementation of user fees, right? We're going to start screening a lot of the projects, the past projects and those that we've started. We continue our screening process to ensure that we're doing the right thing, because after you implement, you don't want to abandon what you have and assume that everything will be running smoothly, because we have to continue to monitor and evaluate these projects. Right? So we have mastered the art of protecting the environment in collaboration with our stakeholders. But what we have not mastered is how do we get the individuals in the society to continue to assist us in managing these the resources that we have, right? FAO, Eric, a lot of the community groups within Tobago, even persons in the diaspora, Tobagonians everywhere, even you, Desmond, with all of this you have been doing. We appreciate it. You all are reaching out, and we're trying to take that collaborative approach to protecting the environment, and that is the correct way to go. Right? I believe in participatory democracy, and I will continue to push that. You have seen us doing a lot of, consultations across the space as it relates to agriculture and fisheries. So we are going to continue doing that so that we're trying to get it right. Right? We are no longer at the point where we have to, take everything for granted. You see the rise in food prices, you see the rise in fuel prices. You're feeling it in your pockets, you're feeling it everywhere in terms of climate change and the impacts on the environment. So we can't take things for granted. We can't politicize everything. Certainly, I am not going to politicize food, right? The food is a basic need. And therefore, all of us, we have to take a hands-on approach to managing Tobago's natural resources. So thank you, Desmond, for giving me the opportunity to speak briefly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Our secretary and a very good collaborator for Environmental Fridays. You've already given us at least 2 or 3 different speakers and other connections. So yes, we very much appreciate the work you do and the collaboration and your spirit of collaboration with us and others. Thank you so much. All right.
You are most welcome.
Okay, very good. So next, I would like to go ahead and introduce our co-host, Dr. Sean Ned. He is originally also from Tobago, the village of Canby. He attended Bishop's High School. He has a PhD in physical chemistry from Iowa State University, I believe with emphasis on computational, Sean?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. He is a registered instructor and arbiter for the World Chess Federation. So he's really like a master, I guess, at chess. He's the owner of the STEM Center. And is that in Scarborough, Tobago? Scarborough?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And he's the director for policy and monitoring and evaluation in the office of the Deputy Chief Secretary for Tobago House of Assembly. And he is the chair for the Progressive Democrat Patriots, a political party in Trinidad and Tobago. Sean, it is a pleasure. Again, we've been talking and having conversations and all of that. It's a pleasure for you to be here on Environmental Friday. So it's your turn now to introduce our speaker.
All right. So greetings to everyone. I am quite excited to be here. The issues of the environment and being on Environment Fridays. And I like the tagline, it is personal. And I think it really is. And for all of us, we have some connection. So I thank everyone being here. I appreciate the secretary taking the time to give us some words there about what's going on. I'd like to thank Dr. Murray for his consideration and invitation to this session. Right. So in terms of Eric, so Eric is doing great work. Very recently, uh, Miss Fanovich would have accepted an award on behalf of Eric at the Tobago Day Awards. So I want to say congratulations to the organization and thanks to Miss Fanovich for being there. And she is, of course, our speaker today. Eric has a particular vision, and his vision is for the sustainability for the people and ecosystem of Tobago. And my hope here is that Northeast Tobago starts from this point, as Eric seems to be pioneering the environmental needs of Tobago. So it's much appreciated. To me, Tobago has always grappled with its developmental needs in conflict with the effects on the environment. So with the need for development and related policy, it is very important to understand our limitations as we affect the environment in Tobago. So I'm very much so looking forward to hearing today's topic. And that topic is Tobago's natural resources and environment. And the speaker is Miss Lanya Fanovich. So I will introduce her. Ms. Lanya Fanovich is a senior ecologist and outreach training expert at the Environmental Research Institute, Charlottesville, which is ERIC. She is based in Tobago since 2014, working closely with community members and implementing sustainability, community science-based conservation and monitoring projects. She is also the Reef Check National Coordinator for Trinidad and Tobago and was part of the technical writing team for the successful nomination and designation of the Tobago East Tobago UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve. And prior to joining ERIC, Lanya completed a BSc in zoology with a minor in marine ecology and an MSc in science and management of tropical biodiversity, both at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. So it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Lanya Fanovich, and I give the floor to her to go through her presentation of Tobago's natural resources and environment. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ned, for the introduction, and thank you, Desmond, for the invitation. So we're very happy from Eric to be able to talk to a wider audience about some of the work that we're doing and really talk about and put Tobago out there, talk about the resources and everything that we have. So I think I'll just go and dive into the topic. And first of all, I have to also mention I bring greetings from our CEO, Alyosha Woski. He's unable to join us. He would have loved to see the presentation and make sure that everything I'm saying is correct. But yeah, so we'll get straight into the presentation. So let me just get a second to share my screen. So can everyone confirm with me that they're actually seeing my screen?
We are seeing it. We are seeing it.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So for the sake of, because we do have issues with bandwidth, during the course of my presentation, what I'll do is I'll take off my video and then I'll put it back on, afterwards. All right.
Okay.
So, all right. So before I dive into the actual presentation, one of the questions, well, I'll introduce a little bit about me first. And the audience, I remember, is supposed to be comprising of students, and I see that I've heard that there are some students who are now completing their bachelor's degree, and they're going to go out into the work world very soon looking for jobs, and we're probably going to have a lot of aspiring biologists. So one of the things that I wanted to do is do a quick poll. Hold on. And what I'm going to do is I will post it on the chat.
The chat, okay.
So just trying to navigate through this.
All right, no problem.
And this question is quite simple. I want you all to write in this poll what it is that you think a biologist does. So it could be one word, it could be a sentence. Describe to me what you understand might be the role of a biologist. What's a typical day you think, is normally for a biologist? And then we'll come back to it much later on.
All right.
So in the chat, I posted a link. So just confirm with me that you're able to
Yes, I'm right.
access the link and you're writing. Okay, perfect.
Yes, it's accessed. And submit.
All right, perfect. So I'm starting to see some
Response.
answers coming in, some responses. So I'll let that run and we'll come back to it afterwards.
All right.
So you have some time during the presentation to think about it if you couldn't come up with an answer just yet.
Okay.
All right, so a little about me. So one of my favorite things to do sometimes when I'm introducing myself, you would have known that there was this meme that tend to compare what people perceive everyone does. So I particularly like that meme to a certain extent. So in terms of the job, the work that I do here at ERIC, in terms of my role as a biologist, a lot of times people might think that I'm underwater, communing with animals, just studying them, hanging out with them. And just playing with the fishes, or in this case a baby lobster, right? Whereas my family think that I am working 24/7 because I'm always so busy. So I am sleeping, eating, living at my desk, and more or less just working right through. Whereas my friends, because I'm on the island of Tobago, my work is very close to the beach, they think that my life is a vacation. So I'm just there chilling, drinking something and, enjoying life, which is not entirely wrong, but I mean, yeah. Usually young aspiring biologists who come to me, who interns, prospective interns, their perception is that when I am here at ERIC, a typical day is I'm going out, I'm conducting surveys and collecting data and crunching numbers and more or less, doing what they think a biologist does. Whereas my boss think I'm drowning in work and I'm constantly trying to keep abreast, which is not too far off from what I think I'm doing, which is still being in the water while being at the desk. And working on a lot of different things, be it from analyzing data, communicating with other people, preparing outreach material, doing training, writing chapters, support different policy developments, etc. So it's, I'm more or less drowning at my desk, partly underwater, and both in the field as well as behind the desk. So this more or less kind of summarizes what my typical day might possibly look like, or month might look like. And I do recognize that we do have foreigners amongst us, persons who are not from Trinidad and may not be really familiar. So just to give you some perspective of where I am, everyone know where the United States is located, and where South America is located right here. Venezuela. So we're just a small island, and if I zoom in, we can see Charlottesville is on the tip of Northeast Tobago. So we're right here at the end, very much, is there a way to hide this app screen? So very much, very, very far away from a lot of activities that are happening in Tobago. So we're close to the coastline. And just to give, to zoom in a bit more into Tobago. So here is a close-up of Tobago, and I'm right in this little bay right here. So that's where my office is. That's where I'm speaking to you live from. One of the things I want you to keep in mind is this yellow shape over the island that I've placed over here. We'll come back and we'll talk a bit more about it, but there is a particular significance for that particular shape that I'm sharing with you. So what is it that we do here at Environmental Research Institute, Charlottesville? So I like to sum up all our activities more or less, into these 4 different areas. And they overlap, some of them feed into each other, but I think this more or less best sums it up. So one of the things that we do is try to support initiatives that lend itself to the blue-green economy. So we are looking at sustainable tourism initiatives, for example, supporting persons who are doing tours, sustainable gardening that invites persons to come and, plant a garden with them, and it supports different children in the community. Our dive tour operations. So we're looking at different initiatives that are non-extractive and are sustainable and encourages tourism, since that is pretty much what a lot of people tend to come to Tobago for, as well as supporting other small enterprise initiatives that give persons, a source of alternative livelihoods. For example, our oysters, we're doing a feasibility study on growing oysters to see if it is that the fishermen might be able to make something out of this, or using the tour guides to be able to collect data with our forest check tours while they're doing their forest tours itself. So we're supporting initiatives like bird watching, ecotourism, snorkeling, and all of this is directly tapping into our natural resources here in Tobago. In order to support these sustainability initiatives, you need policy development. You need to find a way to be able to manage your resources, your natural resources, to ensure that they're not overexploited and they continue to support different sectors, not just sustainable tourism, but also your fisheries, your agriculture industries, etc. So we want to ensure, and that requires a certain level of policy that more or less tells you how we hope things should run. And to feed into policy development, as well as the blue-green economy initiatives, you need data. You need to know what is happening in your system. So we do have some research projects ongoing. We're monitoring the reefs. One in the introduction, it was mentioned that I was the Reef Check coordinator for national coordinator for Trinidad and Tobago. So Reef Check is an international organization that utilizes community-based, volunteer-based reef monitoring data into determining the status of your reefs. So we do have the Reef Check ongoing. We do have the forest monitoring with our tour guides ongoing. We monitor for shark and rays. So data is important, and knowing what is there, how much is there, and what is their state feeds into policy development. And capacity building, all of our initiatives, we try to ensure that it is community-based as much as possible. We try to involve community members, but we can't just throw them off the deep end and say, go forth and talk and do the research, etc. We have to talk to them, integrate them into our work, train them up, and also in the process, train them to become communicators, talking to people about the importance of our natural resources. Having that first-hand experience of going out into the field and seeing what is happening, and being able to express those ideas to the community members, actively feeding into some of the stakeholder consultations for policy development. All of this requires capacity building amongst community members. So this more or less sums up what we're doing. And it, Dr. Ned mentioned that Eric has the vision of sustainability for people and ecosystems of Northeast Tobago. So we are very much interested in ensuring natural resources are managed, it remains sustainable, and that people are able to use it for a very long time, for several generations, right? I've mentioned quite a few times about natural resources, and everything that we're doing is linked to natural resources. So the first thing we need to understand is what exactly is a natural resource. And I mean, if you go online, you can find several different definitions, but essentially it is any sort of material or thing that comes from nature that is used to serve, to support our livelihoods. It supports us for all our needs, and not just us as well, but also our ecosystems. But it's natural things, and depending on how you are referring to natural resources, how you're studying the natural resources that you're referring to, you can have several different classifications. You can talk about it based on its origin. So the non-living natural resources, such as your minerals and fossil fuels, versus your biotic natural resources, which are your living materials. Or you can think of it based on the renewability, which is what we're most often referring to whenever we mention natural resource. So you either look at your non-renewable resources or your renewable resources. So for Tobago, some of our non-renewable resources, and first defining what a non-renewable resource is that it's something that cannot be replaced in our lifetime, all right? It is extracted, it's exploited, and once it's taken out, there isn't any sort of regeneration, or if it's possible to regenerate, it cannot regenerate quickly enough in order to meet our needs or the demands of your population, the peoples within your community. Now, a lot of times, non-renewable resources tend to be talked about in a very bad light. And what I need to mention here is that non-renewable resources is not bad. It is needed because, it's one of the things that is required for a lot of things that we do. But what is required for non-renewable resources? Careful management. It depends on how you sustainably manage those resources. And when we define sustainable, we want to ensure that we're maintaining something at a certain rate, at a certain level, ensuring that there's a ecological balance and you're not depleting too quickly. So one of the non-renewable resources we have in Tobago is lumber, which might be strange for some persons because you think, well, it's a tree and you can grow a tree. But a lot of the trees that we tend to harvest is they tend to be very slow growing trees. And one of the definitions for non-renewable resources that I mentioned is that they cannot be replaced quickly enough to meet our needs. So it takes several years for a tree to be able to grow, to become harvestable. So lumber is one of those very important resources that we need, that it takes very, very long. So that's one of our non-renewable resources. The other one that we have is oil and gas. So there are rigs, there are oil and gas fields off of Northeast Tobago. It's within our exclusive economic zone, which is the area that's been designated for us to be able to conduct whatever we need to do to sustain our economy. So there is some access to oil and gas, and we've often heard about oil and gas being something that is constantly being depleted, and it took millions of years for us to be able to get that particular raw material, for that raw material to form. So as a result, it is one of our non-renewable resources. And then there's the quarry industry. So quarrying, we need it for a lot of our roads and for building. But the unfortunate thing with quarries, once you're mining an area, there's no way that you can replenish a quarry. So once that raw material is mined out of an area, that's it. It's used and you cannot replenish. So those are some of the non-renewable resources that we really have here in Tobago. Moving on to our renewable natural resources. So we talked about non-renewable being something that cannot be replaced in our lifetime, whereas renewable resources can actually be replaced in our lifetime. So we're able to replenish it, or it is not something that can be easily exhausted. So you're talking about things like our sun, which is renewable sunlight. We always have wind, we always have water movement, so we have fishes. So all of these things are considered to be renewable natural resources. Now, I am going to focus most of my talk on the renewable natural resources to Northeast Tobago, and that's because most of our work is based in Northeast Tobago. And I mean, we have a very rich, a very diverse area up here. It's very special. And I'll go into more detail about why it is extremely special. So we'll take a little tour now of Northeast Tobago. So hopefully it's quite scenic here. So we have the Main Ridge Forest Reserve, which is the major forested area for Tobago itself. It was established in 1776, and the purpose for this was so that it can help protect the watershed. So historically, Tobago was a lot of the forest cover was being removed for plantations. We've seen through history several different types of crops: cocoa, cotton, sugarcane. All of these things were being planted as the demands and grew in different periods in time, and it required clearing of forests. And it was realized that as areas were being cleared out, the water supply was dwindling. So, and it was also recognized that there was a very tight link between the forest cover as well as the water supply. So as a result, to protect whatever is remaining of that water supply, the forest reserve was established. And the forest reserve, we have the trees, we have a lot of fauna present in it. So it actually makes up quite a bit of that natural resource here for Tobago. And these resources feed into several different services for both us as well as for the ecosystems, the animals and plants that require the forest itself. So I mentioned watershed protection. So the forest, the tree covers, it provides the shade, it helps hold the soil together and ensure that water is retained, or else what we will have is very dry streams, and we won't be able to support several other not just natural cycles within the forest ecosystem, but also livelihoods in Tobago, such as your agriculture. They require the water for irrigation. So the watershed is protected by your forest. The trees, we know they have roots that will hold soil together and stabilize the land. Last year, we had unprecedented levels of rainfall, and we saw what was happening, especially to those areas that had exposed hillsides. We saw a number of landslips because they did not have anything to actually hold the soil together. So we definitely grow to appreciate the importance of the trees being present and holding on, stabilizing our hillsides. Timber is extracted from our forests. Some of the important timber species are there. So there is some level of extraction for wood to be harvested for house building, for furniture. So anything that we need wood for, it's from our jetties, etc. They would harvest from the forest reserve. Game hunting. So during the hunting season, we have an ongoing season. We're coming towards the last couple of weeks of the open hunting season. So several game species like your agoutis, your armadillos, manicous, for example, iguanas, all of these game species do come from the forest itself. Citrus and cocoa, because there was that close link back, in the past with cocoa plantations, we do still have some, derelict cocoa estates still existing in the forest reserve. And we can still actually see some of the cocoa there growing as well as citrus. We also, it's very important as well for tourism. We do have a lot of persons coming and hiking on the trails simply for bird watching because of the diversity of the birds that we have present. The Main Ridge Forest Reserve is considered to be an important birding area because we have around this time of the year, we see a lot of migratory bird species. And then once that season ends, we still have a diversity of birds. People love to come and see the saber wings, which is almost like a national icon for Tobago. They love to see the different the hummingbirds as well as birds of prey. So it do attract quite a number of bird watchers and just people who enjoy the aesthetics of being in a forest and just want to be in nature, and they just enjoy the challenge of hiking through different trails, etc. And then another very important service is that they do house quite a number of our pollinators, so a number of insects, our bats. They are significant pollinators that allow trees to continue to reproduce, also allow for fruits to be produced so that the forest, it continues to sustain itself, as well as the fauna that require the food from those trees. So very important natural resource here. And then moving away from land, we can go into the sea. So my background is more in marine, so I really I'm always excited to go into the water and see. And these are some of the scenes that we do have here in Tobago. So our marine ecosystems, focusing on the coral reefs itself, that natural resource is important for protecting our shorelines. We've seen some of the effects of strong surges. We've had some significant wave activity a few weeks ago in January, and it would have tossed quite a bit of sand onto the roads. Some buildings would have sustained damage. And if it is that we did not have a reef in that area, it could have been, the impacts could have been more severe. So our corals and the gorgonians that we have in our reefs, they do have a very important role for protecting our shorelines. More importantly, we have fishes, the commercial fisheries that normally are supported. A lot of our, like for example, these schools of grunts, a lot of juveniles for some of the commercial fish species do start their life cycle in our reefs before they move off into deeper waters. We have, our shellfish, like for example, in the form of the lobsters and conchs. So they are very significant for our fishery sector. And the fisheries that we tend to have here is more subsistence fisheries as opposed to, large commercial fishing. So the fishermen, they go out, they catch what they can, and they bring back and they sell. So fish is not necessarily caught in a very, very large scale. But then if you go into our deeper waters, this is where the commercial fishing tend to happen, where a lot of the mother boats go out, they set their long lines, and they do fish on a very large scale. The marine ecosystems, people love to come and see the reefs, see all the little creatures, the fishes. We've had people keep on asking us about sharks, which I can't guarantee that they will see much of our sharks. But this is so the reef resource supports tourism, and with a healthy reef, there are many other livelihoods that come out of supporting tourism, just from your airplane carriers, so your pilots, the persons who have to transport your tourists from the airport to their hotels, the hotels that will house the guests, as well as the dive tour operators, anyone who's carrying the avid diver and the snorkeler out. They, this is what the marine, our coral reefs are able to support. These are the several different livelihoods that it actually supports. So we have tourism and we have the recreation. Recreation doesn't just take the form of diving, but we also have persons who enjoy spearfishing. So that's another form of recreation that our marine resources do support. For the reef itself, we have things like your nutrient cycling, as well as the habitat for the fishes, especially juvenile fishes. They provide that nursery habitat for them. And the nutrients are also cycled very efficiently by our coral reefs. So it's removing a lot of the extra nutrients and integrating it into its system. Other things would be, so our marine ecosystem is also fed by the annual Orinoco plumes that bring nutrients into the water here, and it's able to sustain some organisms. So for example, your sponges, as well as the algae and the fish, etc. So it's a very tight and close-knit system itself. Surrounding some areas of our Northeast Tobago area, we do have little islets, little pockets of terrestrial land. So Little Tobago, Goat Island, for example, St. Giles Island Complex, we do have the Sisters Rocks. These are some of the examples of islets that exist in Northeast Tobago, and they do support quite a bit of birds. So they, in turn, the birds itself lend itself to encouraging tourism, bird watching again. People enjoy going out to see some of the birds that are present on the islets. St. Giles Island Complex is known to be, I think, housed one of the largest populations of magnificent frigate birds in the Southern Caribbean. So that is pretty significant. We have persons who just want to go out and see thousands of birds nesting and roosting on the island. These birds, some of them are poached, unfortunately, but they do feed. People do sometimes eat some of these seabirds. So this is supported by the islets. And yeah, so more, and the islet also feeds to some extent the reefs around it. So around each islet, you still have your marine ecosystem. We know there have been studies in the past that talk about the importance of birds and islands for reefs, where they help with providing you nutrients for some of these reefs. So a pretty good reef ecosystem is supported around our islets in Northeast Tobago. Now, connecting our, what I like to call the veins for Northeast Tobago, connecting our forests to our marine ecosystems, we have our riverine, our rivers. So, and remember, we talked about the Maynard Forest Reserve having that forest cover and the roots system being important for watershed protection. So ensuring that we have water all year round. And so without that, we won't have the rivers in the first instance. So the rivers, they do retain nutrients, they provide water for agriculture. They're also important for recreation. Persons like to go there for tourism again whenever they are crossing through the forest. So it's quite refreshing to see a little stream there. To a lesser extent, persons will probably extract crayfish from the rivers themselves. We don't really have a thriving freshwater fishery in Northeast Tobago, but you'll have those who, for subsistence purpose, they will catch maybe the crayfishes and that for their water cycling. So they also play a role in the soil formation and for purification of your system. So they do flush the system out whenever there are heavy rainfalls. You have a lot of sediments and debris and everything being flushed out of the area by the river ecosystem. So these are some of the primary resources that we have present in Tobago itself. And one of the major threats that we do have, what's normally supporting, or what really, we have our human resources, we have our human systems that closely rely on these different ecosystems that we have present. But unfortunately, our human resources, which need to be closely managed, also form some of the major threats that we do have, that our natural resources actually face. So we're talking about things from illegal and unsustainable use, for example, extraction, illegal logging, illegal poaching of birds and turtles, sand mining. Sometimes you have unregulated illegal fishing, so vessels coming into our waters that are not supposed to be here, coming and competing with the fishermen, removing large quantities of the fish. On the terrestrial side, we have unmanaged land clearing for agriculture and housing development, which in turn can lend to sedimentation of our rivers, which will empty into our reefs and cause sedimentation, so a lot of sediment to settle. So we do have quite a bit of threats that a lot of it is linked to man. So this is where we need to carefully manage how we are actually utilizing the area itself. Yes, there are some natural threats, for example, storms being just generally a natural threat it can wipe out a forest, it can damage your reef. But so far, what we're seeing is that man tends to be the biggest threat. Now, to sum up what we've, our natural biotic resources, more or less what I've just talked to you or given you a tour of is we do have 5 conservation areas, and these conservation areas are really the 5 habitats that are present within Northeast Tobago. So our oceans, our islets, our reefs, ridges, and rivers. And these habitats, these conservation areas, they support a wide diversity of fauna and flora species. when we did the assessment for the UNESCO Man and Biosphere nomination, we had well over 2,200 fauna and flora species, recording about 46 endemics. And then you have these interesting, strange letters around here, which refers to different types of conservation statuses. So, for example, we have 18 edge species, and edge species refer to species that are evolutionarily distinct and at the same time globally endangered. So these are species that are genetically unique to, in the whole scheme of animal life. Then we have 61 migratory. So CMS refers to our migratory species. We've identified at least 61 of those migratory species. CMS referring to the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species. Then we have over 140 CITES species, CITES referring to the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wildlife, Fauna, and Flora. So these are species that are closely managed, are closely monitored when it comes to transboundary transactions. So how people are importing, bringing them in and out of a place. So we have at least 140 of these species that are present in our ecosystem. IUCN, which refers to the International Union of Conservation of Nature, they look at all species as a whole, and they usually produce what they call a red list. A red list looks at the status of a particular species, what their conservation status might be. Are they endangered? Are they critically endangered? Or are their population seems to be stable? We've identified at least 117 of those in just Northeast Tobago alone. So these would have been species that are either critically endangered, near threatened, or vulnerable. So 117 of them. And then we have the Sporax species, which is Specially Protected Areas and Wildlife Regional Activity Center. They would have highlighted species of special interest to them because they either play a particular ecosystem role, or they have a particular conservation status as designated by the IUCN, such as they're endangered, or maybe they're unique to the area of some sort. So we have 90 of those species present in our natural biotic. And when we look at all the species that we have. And this more or less is a summary slide here that covers all the different services that we gather from the different natural resources, the different areas present in Northeast Tobago. So we have our oceans, as I mentioned, and we can have fairly, different types of service, regulating services, which are those services that more or less controls or manage what is going on in the area, provisioning services, so what is being provided by these different ecosystems, cultural services, so that relates more to the human element, what we extract, not necessarily from a user point of view, but rather for something that's a little bit more intangible. So recreation, aesthetics, and then you have your supporting services. So those services that actually support the area itself. All right, and so as you can see, a lot of them, they are quite similar. Some of these, the natural resources are quite similar in terms of what services they provide, but at the same time, they're all quite unique. So there's so many different things that we can actually get from our ecosystems. Now, I mentioned, it was mentioned earlier, we talked about the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve. So going back to that map that I said, keep in mind the area that is shaded here in the yellow, and that refers to the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve area. and it was declared on the 28th of October 2020. And the work and the effort that went into this particular designation was a good example that demonstrates civil society, government, natural resource management authorities working together. So it wasn't just all government and your top tier level of management for our natural resources working on this, which tends to happen a lot of times whenever we're looking at anything that's internationally designated. But you also had the inclusion of civil society. So Eric working with THA was one of those really good demonstrations that it is possible for both government as well as community working together to achieve something great. And in this case, the UNESCO Mana and Biosphere Reserve. And it involves significant amount of community consultation. Now, we do have some discrepancy with names. The official thing is that it's really a Mana and Biosphere, as I mentioned, Mana and the Biosphere Reserve. But we do use the term area in the actual name of the area itself, the designated region. And that was because we wanted the communities to not get a sense that because of this designation, a reserve means that there's a certain level of restrictiveness. So fishing is not allowed anymore, or hunting is not allowed anymore. You can't access certain areas or anything. So we wanted to use the term area, which it doesn't sound as harsh, it doesn't sound as restrictive as a reserve. So that was one of the incentives for having that name. And what the Mana and Biosphere Reserve or area is supposed to really accomplish once it's designated is it's supposed to support these three pillars. So conservation is definitely important because you want to ensure that you are able to protect and manage your landscapes, all your ecosystems. You want to be able to manage your species, conserve them, and genetic variation that is present within your reserve area, because all of these more or less underpin what everything else that it supports. It supports the humans, it supports all the livelihoods. So conservation is very important in that sense. But at the same time, while you're doing the conservation, it's not supposed to hinder on development. So a Mana and Biosphere Reserve is supposed to foster economic and human development, but ensuring that development is still socio-culturally and ecologically sustainable. So it doesn't want to do away with culture. It doesn't want to impact on the culture or the livelihoods that are traditionally occurring in an area, but it wants to make sure that the practices that are normally implemented in that area is sustainable and it's not going to cause further damage. So it's looking at how do we adjust or change certain things to ensure that we're continuing to use the reserve area, the biosphere, conservatively and sustainably. And then you look at the logistics support. So support coming in the form of demonstration projects, research, education and training on the environment, looking at, and so the logistic support is supposed to support also more or less feed into conservation and development. So all the work that you're doing, how does it feed into the conservation aspect, and how does it feed into the development? And so this more or less looks at the area of the Biosphere Reserve that we're very much interested in protecting our natural resources for. So we have several different zones, which will more or less indicate what level of impact is already there and what level of protection we would want to designate for it. So it includes your protected areas, such as your Main Ridge Forest Reserve, Little Tobago, and St. Giles, which I showed you earlier, are also protected areas. They are considered to be wildlife sanctuaries. The Main Ridge Forest Reserve is also declared by the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago, which is more or less a body that oversees heritage, anything related to our heritage and protecting heritage. So they recognize the Main Ridge Forest Reserve as a natural national heritage site. So there's another layer of protection, and there's another layer of management to the Main Ridge Forest Reserve. We are looking at, and it's already under consideration by the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago, looking at declaring the reefs, the nearshore reefs surrounding the island, plus the islets of Goat Island, as well as Sisters Rocks, as additional natural national heritage sites. So these are right now under consideration, and simply because of the natural resources that need to be managed and what we want to try to protect in them. It also includes this large blue area here. Since 2014, there's been a lot of work around considering the area for a marine protected area so that we are better able to manage our marine resources. Tobago is able to manage their marine resources, so both the reefs as well as the deeper waters within their management zone. A lot of the commercial fishing and the oil extraction usually occurs just outside of the Manna Biosphere Reserve, so there are no impacts expected from those, no direct impacts expected into the marine protected area. But I mean, if anything goes wrong, it can still have that impact. But yeah, so this is so more or less, the Biosphere Reserve encompass your marine protected areas, your islets, your Main Ridge Forest Reserve, and then most importantly, your communities. Your communities are more or less all this road network, as well as a lot, and the actual community itself where people are living here in the Manna Biosphere Reserve. So they're not excluded from it. There is a certain level of work that's being done with the community. Now, I think we've had a few persons that came in a little bit later after I put, did the talk, and I gave a link for a poll that asked, what do you think a biologist does? So let me just quickly see if I can share. Let's have a look at the results. For those of you who did not access the poll, I've put it up again. So if you want to just quickly throw in your 2 cents while I extract. So it's just simply writing, just putting your words, putting your or sentence on what you think is the role of a biologist, or what we do.
Okay.
Are you all able to see the word cloud that's generated?
Yes.
Okay, so we have research being the #1 role of a biologist. Everything that's referring to anything with natural, living, animals, plants, ecosystems. So these are the words that tend to stand out quite a bit. And yes, this is also, these are all definitely things that a biologist does. But a biologist is not just limited to research. Everything that I talked about with regards to the work of Eric, supporting sustainable initiatives, doing policy development, etc., also is included in the role of a biologist. While our work, yes, it requires a certain level of research, what you will find happening is that the research actually forms just a small portion of what we typically would do. So like any aspiring young biologist, we tend to think that, a typical day will be you go out, you wake up in the morning, you go and you collect your data, then you come back and you enter it. You probably, do have a meeting or two, talk about what you're observing, and you might probably do a little other things here and there. But I've quickly, from my years here at ERIC, I think I've lost count, 9 years here at ERIC, I've quickly realized that a biologist role is not so tidy. The research just forms a very small element of what we do. But the research what happens to that research is the most important thing. And it's how we as biologists get that research out there. So a lot of our work really comes into the more applied aspects, which is using that data, using the information that we have learned into informing management, informing persons on what is happening and what is the best way forward. Because, for example, in the reef, I'm seeing certain animals are being impacted. So what we need to do, and this might be the reason for it, so what we need to do is figure out what is causing this issue, and this is what we need to manage. So the research allows you to zone in to the exact things that you need to manage and hopefully put in some level of realism into your management plan. It can also help identify what are the potential areas that can be done, seeded into or fed into for development. So we are not supposed to want to hinder development itself. We want to be able to ensure that development continues, but again, using the information, using our knowledge to inform what is the best way forward for a particular project, land development, or if this can support a certain tourism or the fisheries, etc. That is where our data comes into. So research, I think, just forms a very small aspect of what we normally, as a biologist, need to do. And then, more importantly, we've reached an age where we're so accessible. Information is extremely accessible. And I think one of the most important things that a biologist does is communicate and making sure that the information is communicable. So for aspiring biologists, where does that lead you? Now you're like, okay. What I can encourage you to do is continue while you're building up your information, while you're learning, look for opportunities to be able to volunteer or intern in any sort of program that you can actually get some real world experience and see what is happening on the ground. Also practicing your communication, learning how best to break down information for people to understand, because oftentimes we find that we tend to be bogged down by a lot of technical terms and jargon. And what we want the message that we want to get out there is not necessarily translated well. And therefore, that's why you have a lot of misunderstandings of what is happening as a biologist. So working, and even sometimes with regards to, wanting to figure out how you can really conserve on your natural resources, or getting involved with working with one of these ecosystems or natural resources to conserve, look for, as I mentioned, look for groups. And you can even do little things by yourselves, something as simple as making sure that you tidy up or clean up wherever you go. Small actions do also play a part. Educating yourself and learning what you can as an individual do, and making small changes to the way you look at things, to the way you consume, can also play a big role in terms of, conserving your natural resources. So, I think that more or less
Okay.
brings me to the end of my little talk.
All right. This was a big talk. It was
It was a big talk. It's a lot of information I just gave. So
inspiring talk. I love the slides. You are very good at doing these slides. That first one about me, I'm going to copy that somehow. It's really,
So,
yeah, really cool. It's really cool. So
Yeah.
Sean, Dr. Ned, do you want to say anything here? Begin the questions and comment section. We'll probably
Yes.
do this for about 15 minutes before we'll have to take off.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank presenter, Ms. Fanovich, for a very inspiring talk. I like the pictures. I like seeing where I live shown in such a very nice way.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of questions actually. I don't want to overshadow any of the other persons, in the room.
So take one of yours and then we could have,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, no problem. So one of the major concerns I have is how can we balance the developmental needs of Tobago with environmental conservation? I don't know if you have a perspective on that.
Yeah, that is actually a very difficult question to answer because you don't want to impact on your different livelihoods. We know that we have a lot of persons who require, they live off of your natural resources, and you don't want to impact on them. So it might mean looking at you have to definitely talk to your stakeholders. Figure out what exactly are their needs, what are their concerns, what it is that is, that they are relying on, so that you can eventually, you can actually, pin down where your needs are, and look for different strategies that can actually allow them to tap into different resources, alternative livelihoods, etc. But I think one of the major things really is building capacity. You need to build everyone's capacity to be able to understand what they're doing. You need to educate them and really get out the information that, the natural resources are limited, regardless of, the fact that I talk about renewable and non-renewable. If it is that is not managed, we can very quickly deplete. So you need to build their capacity to be able to understand and to utilize the resources more sustainably. It might also mean introducing new technologies so that they can, for example, a simple thing like might be for fishermen, use of different hooks might be one way to ensure that they're not just catching everything, and they can release certain species that they're not targeting. For example, sharks. Using one particular hook will, cause a lot of damage. But if it is that you change, make subtle changes to the technology and demonstrating to them how to use it, etc., you can actually, address some of the needs. While it is that, you can do everything you can to protect the environment, the mere fact that your humans are important, and how we use it is the important aspect. this is where you need to really, touch on their needs and really build their capacity to be able to manage and utilize the natural resources.
Okay, great. Maybe just a quick corollary question. Have you all started putting together policies that may actually help with that holistic approach across the island?
So we are in the process of working on the management plan. It's going to be a 10-year plan that will be renewed every 10 years management plan for the targeting the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve. So it's going to touch on different things from alien invasive species to agriculture, tourism, all the different sectors, all the different impacts, different things that could affect our natural resources, and ensure that we have different strategies in place to be able to manage those areas. And this will be implemented probably by a group comprising both of civil society as well as government, looking at and strategizing how to implement and ensuring that the different divisions, different agencies, different community organizations are working closely together to implement the management. We've also looked at, a few years ago, writing a sustainable shark and reef management plan, because we recognize that sharks, they're not doing so great in the environment. Because of their biology, they're not really sustainably harvested, and we want to ensure that, and they also play a very important role in the environment as your top predators. So we want to ensure that that could have been more carefully managed to ensure that we're not extracting more sharks than necessary. So we wrote, working together with fisheries, where we've consulted with Institute of Marine Affairs, the University of the West Indies, etc., and as well as your fishermen, who would be the first hand or the best scientists, as I like to say, for talking about what they're seeing and what is realistic. And we've been able to put together a management plan that right now is waiting to be reviewed and hopefully implemented by the Tobago House of Assembly.
Okay, great. So thanks for that. I'll shift over to other persons who may have questions from the audience. Is any member would like to say anything, or else I have some other questions?
Yeah, especially our students. Any of our students have questions? Solange, who else? Zizi. Any of you guys have questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So while I was listening to the presentation, I was thinking about how we make efforts as biologists and aspiring biologists to really try to conserve these resources and the environment and such. But as someone who's still learning and an undergrad, I was just asking if you have any, I don't know, advice or guidance for like persons who sometimes feel discouraged because you see around us that people don't care that much. It's kind of disheartening when you're making every effort on one side to try to help things, and then on the next side it's like no one cares, it's going all right. So I just wanted to know from your perspective.
Yes, anybody who is working with environment can probably vouch for frustration and the sadness that you think you're doing everything that you possibly can, and to no avail. So changing attitudes is one of the major things that need to be done, and that takes time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not going to change in a month. It's not going to change in a year. You may be able to change attitudes for a few people at a time, and over time and after a while, it is that movement and its momentum that grows. So it takes a long time. So I know that it's easy to be discouraged, but know that it's better that your work is able to change a few persons at first, and then you would see eventually that might spread, right? So what we have done when we started here as at ERIC was that we started with 6 persons from the community from Northeast Tobago. And the idea is that we were training them to be what we call community-based field technicians. We built their capacity to understand how a marine protected area worked, or protected areas on the whole, how it worked. We trained them to dive, to collect data with us, etc. And one of the other reasons why we were keen to have technicians from the community was because we saw them as being the persons to be able to communicate with people in their communities. Because especially from a small island area where all the different communities here are very rural, they're usually skeptical when someone from outside who's never lived their life and understand the challenges come in and tell them how they should manage things, how they should do things, etc. But they're more likely to listen to somebody that they know, who knows the struggles that they go through. And it doesn't help as well that they would have heard a lot of promises, a lot of initiatives. It starts and then it stops when they don't know what's going on. So they're very, very cautious when it comes to anyone who's not from the village. But by having these community-based field technicians, they are the ones who will go out. They've gotten the first-hand experience. They see exactly what's happening in the reefs, for example. They see what's happening with the birds or in the forest. They're understanding the information, and they can communicate. And from there, they're able to pull more and more people on their side. And gradually, they won't change everything in a snapshot because, you're talking about changing habits, but people can make subtle changes, and that you should take every little win that you can as some sort of encouragement. So don't be discouraged, just continue at it, but at the same time always reflect and figure out what is it that is not working. What exactly is it that people might need? Because you might think that you're implementing a good project, which is good, but it may not actually be addressing the exact needs that really should be addressed. So you have to really look at what it is you're trying to implement, what it is you're trying to conserve very closely, and figure out what I am doing is exactly what is needed, or should I adjust my strategy? Okay, so it takes time. It takes years.
Yes. So what you just laid out there in your answer is like the principles of community engagement. Like it cuts across whatever you want to bring to improve or change in a community. The principles you just laid out, you should do a presentation on that too. And it doesn't matter if it's in the US, if it's in the Caribbean. You do not want to as an expert come in and tell people stuff. That's like a shutdown, like guaranteed. Okay. So I just wanted to say that. And then I wanted to find out if you, Eric, and maybe other groups that you know of, have opportunities for students to get involved in some way or the other, doing research, doing just being on the job, whatever. Do you have those sort of student outreach, student education to come and have real world, real life experiences with you guys?
So we do take in, because our organization is really, really small, and it's a nonprofit organization. Staff is about 5 persons. We do take on limited internships. So we have persons who will come in and they will be assigned to a particular project. where they assist us in collecting data. They go out with us and they collect the data, or they do some, background research for us. They will go out and help us with community engagement. So yes, there are opportunities for students to be able to, come in as an intern and work with us, and therefore they gain the experience of what it is like to work with an NGO in a small island developing state in a rural community, and understand what it takes. And it's not just strong biology, but they learn different things from policy, sustainability. So it's a very diverse thing that the experience that they will get. We've also had in the past master students that came in and they did their research project under us. We try to direct the project as much as possible, align it with one of our ongoing projects as much as possible. So it feeds into that. So that is also an option for thesis students.
So they could contact you, or do you have another designated person for?
So they can contact me. They can send in their interest, and I can talk to them. And then I also bring in the CEO as well, and we have a chat about what your interests are and what it is that we can offer you.
Okay, all right.
I don't know if my screen with all the contact information is still showing.
It's still
Yeah.
showing. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So we have a few more minutes, possible. At least 2 questions.
So I can ask again. I'm hoping at
Mm-hmm.
the other. All right. So a very general question. All right. What is the most impactful action that Tobago can actually do to support the environment?
I know.
So the most impactful action, really, and again, it comes back down to your human aspect, I think. It really comes down to building the capacity and changing attitudes. And impact will not, if to get the maximum impact, it's not something that's going to just, again, it's not a very quick fix. The biggest impact will come over time. So it is grooming these children from young, and really getting out there and talking to people and really changing attitudes, and coming up with projects that can really integrate persons in the community, so that they can see that there are other alternatives, there are other options besides just hardcore fishing, for example, which is one of the things that we have been trying to do with the oyster project, which is demonstrating that, by growing some oysters, you can have a few fishermen that will come together. They will manage, and they will clean, and they will sell the oysters, and they earn something from this. And they don't need to spend as much time out at sea, and therefore you have less fishermen extracting from your fishing resources already. So showing, coming up with realistic and demonstrable actions or livelihoods that can integrate your conservation with a typical activity. So forest check, again, you're making use of your tour guides and getting them into talking to their clients about how important it is to conserve the environment, and having their clients collect the data with them so that they can see that they're making some sort of contribution and not just having a nice forest talk. I mean, nice forest talk is pretty, and good, but you have that actual element of education and really getting information out there. And the culture itself, it's really delving into the communities and building them up as much as possible to change attitudes and adjusting the cultures. Yeah.
The major part is to dealing with this is an educational component.
Education, starting from young, getting them, knowledgeable from young, and really appreciating what their environment is like, what is present. I was amazed at. I remember there was in 2015, there was a BioBlitz that was conducted by the Trinidad and Tobago Field Naturalist Club in conjunction with the University of the West Indies Zoology Museum. And, it was a lot of naturalists and scientists that came down, and they tried to identify in 24 hours all the species of plants and animals that they can possibly find in the Charlottesville area. And if you were to ask, I remembered asking a child once, how many bird species do you think is present in your backyard in Charlottesville? They told me 5, when in fact, instead of giving me a large number, I would have been happy with an outrageous number. They just said 5, as opposed to, the actual count was like 200, thereabouts 200 and something, right? So it means that a lot of children, they do not really understand what rich resources they have present in their background, in their backyard. A lot of kids live right there by the sea, and they've probably never jumped in the sea before. So really fostering that from young is a good start.
So is there environmental science in the curriculum, and when does it start? And
there is environmental science, I think, from what I understand, in the school curriculum, but it's a very repetitive, taught science, which is just like, this is what photosynthesis is, this is a food web, and this is how it works, etc.
They don't get out in the field, and
a lot of times, no. So there isn't that really integrative approach to education.
Okay. There is a hand here, Karisan.
Hi, is everybody hearing me clearly?
Yes.
Just to add on what she was saying with the education system. Now, I'm pretty young, I'm 22, but I really find my passion in educating people about biology. And what I kind of understood from all of that was, at a primary school level, students are really not getting the basics as it relates to their community. It will more be like a standard of view of biology, like what is photosynthesis, but they don't really go in depth as to how is the reef impacting your country, how is it even impacting you, and they don't really get into what it means to be in Tobago specifically. They just kind of go more out on the things that deals with America and the things that has nothing to do with Trinidad and Tobago specifically. So when she said that, education is one of those key points, I truly, truly agree with that, and believe that as a future biologist, one of the best things that we can probably do is get into the minds of the younger children.
So for your age group, are there groups of students like yourself, persons concerned about this? Because that's one of the things you could do yourself, is form these groups and start to do different projects within the community, going into classrooms or what have you. So some of that could be done regardless of your age, 22, locally. You don't have to wait on the government. You don't have to wait on Eric. You don't have to wait on THA. You guys together could say, okay, this is a problem. Here's what we're going to do.
Yeah, or even with some of the existing groups, talk to them, this is your interest, and find those that, especially ones that more or less match what you're interested in doing, and something can be worked out so that you can visit the schools and talk to them and make things exciting, make things relatable. That's one of the problems that we've established, is that students, they hear the science, but they're unable to really link it to their reality, to the real world. And so there's a very strong disconnect, and that's something that we have been trying to do through the community based with the community-based field technicians. For example, when we had the climate change champions a few years ago, it was talking to people in the community about climate change, why it's affecting, why it is important, why they need to think about it, and really relating, like, what they are currently experiencing to climate change, so that they can see there is a linkage with some of the rainfall patterns that we're seeing, some of the crops, the changing seasons, etc. All this is climate change. You're seeing it happening around you, but they don't necessarily, pin it down to climate change, because a lot of the documentaries, a lot of the things that they hear about is really ice caps melting and polar bears dying, etc. And nothing that is actually local content.
Yep. Well, ladies, gentlemen, students, older people like myself, we want to thank our speaker, Ms. Lanya Fanovich, for a wonderful presentation, insightful, educational, inspirational. We want to thank our guests who came on here, our Secretary Charles Panton, for dropping in and giving us some insight. And also very much want to thank my friend, Sean Ned. I'm pretty sure he and I are going to have some conversations after this. And I also encourage Karasan, I'm going to be contacting you too, so we could talk about what you could do and get some things going. Thanks to everyone, and I hope you have a great weekend, and we look forward to our next Environmental Fridays. Spread the word. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
For more information about our sponsors and partners, please visit the Environmental Fridays Partners and Sponsors page. For more Environmental Fridays, visit our website at theenvironmentalfridays.com.